Hello and welcome to the FinanceSmartz Entrepreneurship Series. Here is our host, Arul Nigam.
Today, I have the honor of speaking with Mr. Mudit Mathur, the General Manager of Dole India and a veteran of Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Mathur has global experience as an entrepreneur, from Vietnam to Hong Kong to Taiwan to India. So first of all, could you please just explain your path to where you are today and what originally motivated you to become an entrepreneur?
Sure, with pleasure. So, even as I was growing up, I was always fascinated by the way our lives are touched every day by products and services all around us, right, that we consume on a day-to-day basis. And it always fascinated me to see how business organizations are managing to get it all done and deliver the profits to the shareholders. So right through my education, I was focused more on the how part of my learning, as in how to get things done. So I did my engineering and then I joined my MBA class as I thought that would really prepare me well for the challenges and the opportunities in the business world. So I finished doing my MBA in 1995, and then I joined Johnson & Johnson on campus as a management trainee. And my first tenure in J&J was focusing on contract manufacturing. So we had external manufacturers who made products for us. That's where I started my career, my professional career. Again, a great learning experience, I would say, because you really get to see the products being manufactured. So you learn the whole process of production, procurement, planning, quality. The nuts and bolts of business, I would say, right? And so it was a good grounding for my systems and process-based management learning. It also gave me opportunities to, move further on the supply chain. So then after that, I took on a supply chain role for a couple of years. And that kind of grounded me on the whole sales planning and operations planning process that happens at a company level. So it really kind of, got that sense in my head about how important and critical it is to build a business that's reliable, that performs, that operates on a in a predictable way, in a predictable fashion, right? So great learning in that assignment as well. And then there was an opportunity for me to move to a regional role, and that was a information technology role. I was doing a data warehousing related work for the operations team across the Asia Pacific. And that was a very, very interesting assignment because I really saw how, the connectedness of the data with what we do in the business. So whatever we do in the business, it generates the data. And then when you look at the data and then you analyze the data, it tells you so much more about not just the business, but also about how we are running that business efficiently, inefficiently. What are the areas that can be improved? So data, is, and again, in today's context, there's so much more that we're doing with data. But even back in 2000, there was a lot that we did with that. I came back and I joined as a regional manager. I joined sales function coming back. So as you can see, I've been on a rotation across different functions. So gave me an opportunity to learn different things in different aspects about the business. So this was a turning point, I would say, because, I found my passion for people and customers in this particular assignment. So, and then if I look back, the business was in some challenges at that point in time, and it was going through a lot of crisis. And that really forced me to literally fold my sleeves and get into and immerse myself in the business, getting to thick of things. And I realized how people actually mattered in the business and why it is so important to be close to the customer and listen to what the customer is saying. Because any change then that you drive in the organization by listening to your customers is really the way to transform the organization, right? So rather than being internally focused, it's always great to get the customer voice into the organization. Anyway, so I did that, and then there was a very interesting assignment. And the context was that modern trade was coming into India at that point in time. So all the Walmarts and Carrefours and Tesco's of the world were setting up shops in India. J&J India wanted me to go and get some exposure on global customer management. So I was in the US for a couple of years, based out of Arkansas, working on the Walmart team. Again, really exposed me to the global best practices in customer management. And Walmart really has, as you would be aware, really state-of-the-art systems and processes on their vendor management side, which forces the vendors to step up their game, and you literally put your best talent and capability against the customer. And that kind of really ups your game, and you really put your best talent, and it really forces you to sharpen your business management skills. And my mandate really was to not just learn, but then come back and set up a modern trade team in India. And that's what I did when I came back in 2009. Within a year, there was another very exciting opportunity that I just couldn't give up. And that was that, there was an opening in Vietnam where they wanted to send me as a sales director, but really that was not just about being a sales director. It was really about setting up the business in Vietnam. And that was a very unique thing in J&J at that point in time, because in a global multinational like J&J, you really don't have too many untapped markets where you could actually go and create new businesses. But here was an opportunity. So I said, okay, let me do this, because this is something really exciting, and I always wanted to be in a business that's really finding its foot and building itself, and because that's a very different learning from being in a business that's a growth business like India business was at that point in time. So I took that on. Again, great learnings and I ended up creating the organization, setting up a roadmap for the next 5 years in terms of how the organization should go after the opportunities in Vietnam. And did that for 3 years, very exciting time and great place Vietnam to be in. And then I came back and I took over as head of sales in India. And India business was at a very different place, much bigger business, almost $500 million business, 300 plus people team in sales, different challenges. And I love doing this role, growing the business through equipping the organizations on better tools and capabilities, and really expanding the business to new geographies and channels at the same time. Right? So that was a very different mandate from what I was doing in Vietnam. My first general management and a business owner experience came in 2016 when I took over as commercial director for Taiwan, J&J Taiwan. And this was a full business responsibility with the functions reporting into me, and I had the full business delivery responsibility for the whole market. And I felt like this is a role that I was always wanting to do, because it really brought me into the center of everything that needs to be done. Looking at all the opportunities in the market and creating the structure and creating the future strategies that would help us to grow not just in the current year, but also in the years to come. So new products, innovation, organization build-up, capability, digital marketing. So a lot of new areas and new things to look at. And then Hong Kong got added to that assignment as well, which meant that I had to now really literally, have my feet in two different boats, and that really stretched me. But then it also taught me a lot about how do we manage your priorities, how do you delegate through teams and people. So it was both a personal leadership workshop for me, if you like, and also about the business delivery. So as you deliver business, you also learn and you also grow as a leader. So I think that's what this role did for me. I finished that middle of last year, and I came back to India. Left J&J and came back to India and tried a few different things. I actually went to teaching. I joined back my alma mater and started doing sessions for second year MBA students. Loved doing that. It was very interesting and exciting, very different from what I had done all through. So 24 plus years with Johnson & Johnson. So it again, I was experiencing new things, and then along came this opportunity of setting up Dole in India. And again, I reflected back and I said, look, this is what I enjoyed doing in Vietnam. So this is something that I would want to do. So that's how I landed where I landed, which is now I'm responsible for setting up the Dole business in India. Dole is a huge brand outside of India. As you would be aware, in the US, it's a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah,
it's a new market for India, for Dole. So it's a different challenge. So back to India, which I know as a country, but it's a brand that's new to the market. So that's the challenge that I am signing up for right now. So that's where I am.
so could you talk a little bit more about those challenges and I guess the similarities and differences between working in like an established corporate environment that you did at J&J before versus the sort of more of a startup environment that you've been in?
Yeah. Sure. And there is actually a lot of difference, more than what I thought there would be. And as I think about it, for me, if I were to kind of find a example of what would represent the whole startup thing for me, as I think about it, it looks more to me like, it's like building a cart, from scratch. And then you also have to, so you build the whole thing together, put the wheels on, and then you also start to push till the time you get it to a place where it is moving by itself. And there are enough, systems, processes, and sustainability in that thing to go by itself. Versus working in a multinational is, you're part of the larger organization. There are already, things that have been done before you. There are people, and there is a structure to drive the business. So your role there becomes more about putting the strategies for the future in place, leading teams, driving performance, right? So it's a very different focus. One is about literally creating a business and a business value. And the other is about driving performance and driving the future success of the organization. So that's one, larger, difference in terms of the context, right? The other, I would say, is the organization. So startups are typically lean and agile. Legacy big businesses have better resources with qualified people on team because, everybody wants to work for Johnson & Johnson. So it's easy to attract talent in Johnson & Johnson. Whereas if I have to start from scratch, if I were to go and say, there is no brand value in the market, it's difficult to hire good talent because people don't know, people have questions about the long-term viability of the business. So it's you will find talent, but it's a different kind of a talent, right? So that's one thing. So you have to find what you have with those people, and then make them work better and improve their effectiveness as you go along. The second thing I would talk about is the culture. Startups need to get people to take ownership and get things done, right? In bigger businesses, you rely on teams and process to do the job for you. So that's the other, that's how the whole team conversation happens. And startups are relying more and more on people who bring that energy and drive and initiative to get things done. On the resourcing side, the financial resourcing, now resources are tight everywhere. Let's admit that, but I would say that, sometimes it's actually more difficult to reallocate them in bigger organizations versus smaller businesses. You could literally move your monies from one line of the P&L to another faster in a startup. But in a bigger organization, you'll spend a lot more time in aligning people within the function, sometimes across the geographies, especially if it's a matrix organization. So it can slow you down a lot, right? Customer centricity is the other area where I think, smaller organizations, startups tend to be more closer to the customer. They understand their customer better and they respond faster. Larger organization tends to get internally focused. So I used to spend a lot more time in J&J talking internally to different people, different stakeholders, regional teams, global teams, and sometimes, lesser versus my expectation. with customers in terms of what's happening in the markets, what's happening with the shoppers, what are the new things happening. So I think the larger organizations tend to lose that focus. So, and I think that's a very energizing factor to work in a startup, is that, when you're close to the customer, when the customer is giving you direct feedback, it really energizes you. You know what you're doing, and you're getting an instant feedback in terms of whether it's working or it's not working. So I think that's the other thing I find very different. Of course, there's more empowerment in startups versus bigger organizations. Bigger organizations expect you to be more compliant with the policies and systems and process. Startups really want you to go out there and get things done. The most important part, I would say, as an entrepreneur, would be the whole, the risk management part. There is always a business risk that you run, which, whether it's a small business or big business. But in a startup, it's always the one with I would say there's more risk in a startup in the initial phase. And actually, I see it no different to the early days of any life form, if you like. Till the time it gets to the stage where its basic systems and organs are developed and it's self-sustaining, you always need to be incubating it and watching over it very closely. And one needs to be very hands-on, vigilant at all points in time, and be ready to intervene when necessary. So this is probably tiring at times, but it is also, I would say, the most rewarding part of the experience of running a startup. Right? Again, stakeholder management wise, like I said before, there are more, there are more external stakeholders in a startup that anybody working in a startup would deal with, especially the entrepreneur. Whereas there are more internal stakeholders if you were to be just heading a business in a larger multinational organization. Right. So these are broadly the things that I wanted to highlight in terms of what's it like to be in a startup versus a larger organization.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And since you were talking about risks, could you just talk about how different shocks, like perhaps the pandemic right now, or in the past, maybe recessions or different shock factors like that, have affected the way you approach business, and what have you learned from that perhaps you could pass on to listeners right now?
Sure. So yeah, and I think these times, these kind of shock periods. We always talked about the VUCA world. We are actually living in the VUCA world right now. There is so much of volatility, right? There's so much of uncertainty. We still don't know when the pandemic is going to get over. We don't know what the world is going to look after that. So yes, it requires you to be literally thinking on your feet. And to that extent, I think the startups would do better from being able to adapt and change versus larger organizations. Larger organizations will have their own structures and processes that have to be rebuilt, if you like. I mean, so if I give you an example of how things are happening in India today, I see that the modern trade, which has larger stores and more organized, centralized purchase, they are struggling more today because they're not able to manage the agility and the fact that they're sitting on huge overhead infrastructures to the extent that given the drop in the retail sales is impacting them the most, whereas the small trade retailers are able to be more agile. They've upped their service, so they're actually delivering to the localities, to your apartment building. And so they have increased their service, and they've actually gained a lot in this whole pandemic. So for me, that's an example of how big structures can be a challenge in these kind of times, whereas they actually work quite well in a larger, in a period of larger stability and growth phase. So that's the right structure there, but the same structure becomes a hurdle when you look at times like these. So I think that's where I think, now, of course, having said that, resources in terms of financial resources and viability becomes a challenge for the smaller businesses because they tend to have, lesser ability to survive these shocks over a longer period of time. So financially, they still have to make sure that they are kind of finding ways to de-risk their business um, while they evolve and they come back, and with their agility they win back the customers. So that's something to be watched out for the smaller businesses and startups particularly.
That makes sense. And so since you were talking about, I guess, sort of the challenges of navigating like a bigger environment, and also before with Vietnam and Taiwan, like being stretched and being forced to evaluate your priorities, could you talk a little bit more about how to be smart in prioritizing different tasks, and also delegating tasks to the other people on your team?
So I think what really I have learned about prioritization, we all know what is prioritization as it is put in a book or anywhere else, right? So everybody knows prioritize. I mean, we use it in a very casual way, right? I mean, you need to prioritize your time.
Yeah.
I think what I've learned is that the issue is not prioritization. Sometimes the issue is what is your reference, right? And in a startup, in a small business, or for that matter, I would say any other business, the more you're able to reference your customer, your external stakeholders, the better you will be prioritizing. The more you end up prioritizing basis your either your own thinking or in terms of your own internal conversations with your own teams, internal teams, you could actually find that you're actually not doing the right prioritization. So it's extremely important when you do prioritization to understand the customer very, very clearly, because that should be the source of your prioritization, right? So if you're listening to your customers, they will tell you what they want first and what can come later, versus you deciding based on what your teams are telling you that, hey, let's do this first because this looks more exciting, or this looks more interesting, or this is easier, or this is cheaper, whatever it is, right? So the organizations can get very internally consumed in this whole thing. And the right thing whereas really is to actually talk to the customer and listen to the customer, because that would help you to prioritize in the right way. And that's what I really learned in my Hong Kong and Taiwan assignment. Wherever I was confused about, should we do this or should we do that, I always found that, the better answers came by talking to the customers and getting their inputs on what would really matter to them. And then I took that as an input and say, okay, if this is what matters to the customers, can we prioritize this? And I realized that, as you build this organizational language, more and more people appreciate the fact that you're actually helping them also to focus on what really matters for the customer. And that really helps your business, right? At the end of the day, the business comes by fulfilling the needs of the customers. So if you're listening to the customer, if you're fulfilling the needs of the customers, your business will do well, right? Versus being internally focused and be driven by what your own constraints and your own whims and fancies might be.
That makes sense. It seems like you're saying your customer should be your guiding light, and all your decisions in terms of your just general strategy, and also with what you prioritize, should be based on the customer.
Absolutely. So the more you're able to make your customer as your guiding post, the better you would prioritize, the better you would allocate your resources, and you would do much better versus being internally focused and not being close to what the customer really is asking for.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I guess sort of just based on the lessons you learned from the customers, could you talk a little bit more about how to build a brand? Because I know that's something else that you have experience with.
Yeah, so I think every business would at some point in time would want to build brands, and the reason why we want to build brands is because that's what you really create, which you can then pass on to your customers, and then ultimately the customers will own your brands, right? So we love brands. For example, if you think of a brand, right? So for example, if you're a Starbucks fan, like you
Yeah.
like Starbucks, at some point in time, if you think about it, it's not as if Starbucks is telling you that Starbucks is great, but it's because you think that Starbucks means something to you, right? So brand always has to mean something to the consumer, to the customer. So and the focus of the organization has to make sure that the brand is handed over to the customer, and then the customer owns it, and then you listen to the customer, and then you make those changes to the brand as you go along, so that you are always keeping the brand relevant to the customer. So be it about innovations, be it about communication, be it about packaging, everything has to be focused on the customer who actually owns that brand. So if I were to just kind of put down my thoughts on how do you build a brand, I would say you begin by understanding who your target audience or customer is, what your marketplace is, and who's your competition. So I think it's a combination of consumer, the marketplace, and the competitor, which tells you, where exactly are you going to focus on in terms of building the brand, and kind of, that's the focus for your brand. Secondly, what you do is you pick the focus and the brand personality, keeping in mind what your business can deliver and has competency in. So if your business, for example, if I'm Starbucks, right, I know I can do different kinds of coffees. I can do innovation on coffees. So that's what my forte is. That's what my competitiveness is. So it is in that context, and I go around and build my whole experience of the brand as you walk into a Starbucks. Right? I'm not going to get into sodas. I'm not going to get into ice creams. I'm not going to get into anything that the consumers need. Right? So consumers need a lot of things, but you have to be clear about what is it that you want to build. What is it that your brand stands for? Right? The third thing I would say is that you have to choose how you want to build your equity. What would be your positioning for the brand? Is it premium? Is it mass? Is it health? Is it indulgence? Is it science-based, or is it experiential? Is it based on consumer preferences which are unique? So you have to make those choices around, what would your brand be? Because then when you be consistently communicating on that, that's when consumers start understanding, oh, this is what it is, right? This is what McDonald's stands for. This is how McDonald's is different from Burger King, or Starbucks coffee is different from another coffee beans, Gloria coffee beans, right? So everybody has a different way of bringing it out, and that's a choice that you make as you think about your brand. Right? Then I think and we all see that all the time, the communication part of it, right? The advertising. But then communication is not just advertising, it's also what happens in the store. It's the color of the brand, it's the logo. So it's the whole thing about, what you want to communicate. So the communication strategy has to cover what you want to communicate, where would you communicate, and how would you communicate. And importantly, very importantly, is what's your story, right? Then you marry it with your product, with your packaging, and the channels, the media channels where you would use them to communicate and talk about your brand. Right? And I'm probably talking about brand in a consumer space, but I think this would also apply to some of the other OEM brands, or some of the other brands which are industrial in nature, right? You would not choose digital media for that, but you would choose, let's say, trade exhibitions. You would choose different, brochures and stuff like that to communicate your brand. So it applies. So you have to adapt it to whichever product category you're talking about. Then my final three things on this is, I think brands have to be consistent in what they do. So you got to do things consistently in the same way. You don't want to confuse the consumer. At the same time, it has to evolve. It has to evolve with time, with trends, with what's happening around. So you have to be relevant all the time. So you've got to keep evolving it, right? You have to be also very clear about the financials of the brand in terms of what's the right level of investment, what investment delivers how much of sales, right? Because you could make a mistake on over investing or under investing on a brand. So that's the other, financial is the other thing that you think about. And my thinking is that whatever you do, you don't compromise on the brand and the messaging. You don't walk away from what your brand is. So if you do these things, I think these are all consistent things. And building a brand takes time. It does not happen overnight. But you have to be consistently looking at these things and continue to build it and continue to build on top of this year after year. And a lot of these brands take multiple years to get to a place where they are today. So it doesn't happen overnight. So no point in getting over anxious about so I think the key thing is to keep working on it and keep building it and keep accumulating the brand equity in the minds of the consumer.
That makes sense. And so just as one final question, could you just offer like some parting words of wisdom or your greatest piece of advice for a young entrepreneur who's just starting out, or maybe something you wish you could go back and tell yourself at the beginning of your own career?
Okay. It's a tough one because I'm still on the journey. So, but I can always share what I have learned so far, what I've understood so far. And I would say, entrepreneurship, it's a joyride with its share of scary drops, loops, and moments of exhilaration. Right? So it's not a auto cruise that you do on a highway. Right? It has its share of ups and downs, and more ups and downs than it is normally in the other jobs, right? Remember always that you're going through all this because you have a higher purpose, which is to serve your chosen customers and the chosen needs. That's why you got into entrepreneurship, right? Because you believed that you had a solution which can work for your customers, right? That's why. So, which is why you're willing to, endure all of this, and this is why you signed up for this, right?
Right.
But you don't do it just for money, right? You do it because you enjoy doing this. The financial payoff will happen, but it happens only because you take and you go through all of this and you come out successfully, right? My last point on this would be, we have to, as an entrepreneur, you got to keep your faith on what you are doing through the good times and the rough times. And it's all worth it, right? So when you look back, you will always feel good about the fact that you took those choices. So that's, for me, that's what it is all about. If you ask me, what would I tell myself to do differently? I think we all need to make mistakes earlier than later. We sometimes, if I reflect back on my own journey, I would have probably taken more time to make mistakes, and if I had to start all over again, I would say I would take my chances more. And I have taken fair chances. I've moved around a lot. I've taken the opportunities as they come, but I would do it more, and I would be more purposeful, and I would be more agile in doing that. And this would be my advice also to the others, that if you feel strongly, don't wait for a right moment. There is no right moment. Whenever you feel good about it, that's a right moment.
Yeah, that sounds like a really relevant advice for, I think for me, definitely, and for everyone listening as well. So thank you so much for your time. This was really helpful.
You're welcome. I enjoyed talking to you as well.
Thank you.